This is a quiet space for listening. There is nothing you need to do and nothing you need to solve right now. You don't have to follow every word. You can simply allow the voice to remain in the background. Many people notice that nighttime brings imagined conversations. Future situations begin to take shape in surprising detail. The mind constructs scenes that have not happened. It prepares responses. It revisits past words and quietly edits them. It imagines new ones. This pattern is common. It does not mean something is wrong. During the day, attention stays outward. There are tasks to complete, people to respond to, decisions to make. The mind remains occupied. At night, those external demands fade. And when external input decreases, internal simulation increases. The brain begins forecasting. Forecasting is a survival function. It predicts possible outcomes and prepares for uncertainty. When the room grows quiet, uncertainty feels louder. Silence amplifies possibility. Possibility becomes scenario. Scenario becomes sequence. The mind moves through imagined moments as if they are unfolding in real time. This is not accidental. The brain does not easily tolerate the unknown. It prefers preparation over surprise. Imagined dialogue creates the feeling of control, even if the situation never occurs. The nervous system remains slightly alert during this process. Alertness supports planning. Planning increases mental activity. Mental activity delays rest. Yet the mind believes it is helping. It believes rehearsal will make tomorrow easier. In reality, rehearsal often increases emotional activation. Each imagined outcome carries feeling, and feeling strengthens neural pathways. Strengthened pathways return more easily. That is why one scenario can quietly become many. One imagined conversation turns into 5 variations, each slightly different, each slightly unresolved. The mind keeps adjusting them, searching for the safest possible version. Safety feels especially important at night. There is no distraction from vulnerability. The room is quiet. The body is still, and imagination becomes active. This activity is not weakness. It is the brain attempting to reduce uncertainty in the only way it knows how. Uncertainty feels heavier when everything else is silent. So the mind begins constructing scenes that feel real, even in the dark. As the brain continues simulating possible futures, it is not trying to disturb rest. It is trying to protect you. The human brain evolved to anticipate social outcomes. In earlier environments, social mistakes carried real consequences. Rejection could mean isolation. Isolation could mean danger. Even though modern life is different, the nervous system still reacts to uncertainty as if it matters deeply. Night removes distraction, and without distraction, the brain turns toward prediction. Prediction feels productive. It creates the illusion of preparation. If the mind can imagine every version of a conversation, it believes it will not be caught off guard. If it can rehearse responses, it believes tomorrow will feel safer. But rehearsal activates emotion. When you imagine a difficult interaction, your body responds as if it is happening now. Subtle tension forms. Heart rate shifts slightly. Muscles prepare for response. This is small, but it is enough to maintain alertness. Alertness and sleep move in opposite directions. The more the brain predicts, the more the nervous system stays partially engaged. And the more engaged it remains, the harder it becomes to fully release and to rest. There is another layer beneath this. At night, the mind is not only forecasting, it is also integrating memory. The brain naturally consolidates experience during periods of quiet. It reviews emotional events. It organizes unresolved impressions. If something from the day felt incomplete, it may return as imagined continuation. A conversation you wished had gone differently. A response you wish you had given. The brain attempts to rewrite the ending. This rewriting feels like planning, but it is often emotional processing. Emotion seeks resolution, and resolution feels closer when it is mentally rehearsed. Yet complete resolution rarely comes through imagination alone. So the mind continues adjusting the scenario. It shifts tone. It alters words. It changes outcomes. Each adjustment briefly reduces uncertainty. Then uncertainty returns. This loop is not a sign of weakness. It is the brain performing a function it has always performed. The difficulty arises because nighttime removes competing input. There is nothing louder than thought. When the world quiets, internal simulation becomes more noticeable, and so imagined scenes begin to stretch. They grow more detailed, more vivid, more emotionally textured. The body responds to those textures. Sleep waits for calm. Prediction maintains subtle alertness, and the mind remains active a little longer than it intends to. As imagined scenarios continue forming, something subtle begins to change. They no longer feel like deliberate planning. They begin to feel automatic. The mind moves through possibilities without asking permission. One thought leads to another. One outcome creates a new variation. This shift happens quietly. The brain does not distinguish clearly between imagination and experience. When a scene is vivid enough, the body responds as though it is real. Emotion follows imagery. Imagery strengthens emotion. That is why a simple imagined conversation can carry weight. The body reacts before logic intervenes. At night, logic softens. Analytical thinking reduces. Emotional tone becomes more noticeable. Without the noise of the day, internal images feel closer, more immediate, more convincing. The mind may move between future possibilities and past memories. It adjusts details. It experiments with outcomes. There is a subtle attempt to find equilibrium, to discover a version that feels safe enough. But safety created in imagination rarely satisfies completely, because the real world remains uncertain. And so the mind continues searching. This searching is not aggressive. It is repetitive, quietly persistent. As the body remains still, mental movement becomes more apparent. You notice it more because nothing else competes with it. Silence does not create the scenarios. It reveals them. The brain has always simulated possibilities. It simply becomes easier to observe when everything else slows down. Over time, the intensity of these imagined scenes often decreases, not because they are solved, but because the nervous system gradually reduces activation. Emotional charge begins to soften. Details lose sharpness. The mind grows slightly less invested in perfecting the outcome. Forecasting becomes less structured, more fragmented. Scenes shorten, then dissolve. The need to predict weakens slowly, not all at once, just enough to allow the body to begin settling. And as the body settles, imagination begins losing its urgency. As the imagined scenes begin to lose structure, the mind no longer tries as hard to perfect them. The details become less precise, the dialogue less exact, the outcomes less controlled. What felt urgent begins to feel optional. The brain is no longer actively searching for the safest version. It is simply allowing impressions to pass through. Imagination softens when it is no longer fueled by tension. The nervous system, sensing less threat, begins reducing its alertness. Breathing slows naturally. Muscles release small areas of holding. There is no instruction required for this. It happens quietly. Thoughts may still appear, but they feel lighter now, less demanding, less detailed. Instead of building full scenarios, the mind offers fragments. A sentence without continuation, an image without movement, a memory without emotion. These fragments do not need completion. The brain has already extracted what it needed. Forecasting loses its purpose when the body signals safety, and safety often increases gradually, without announcement. The room remains quiet. The body remains still, but internal urgency begins to fade. What once felt like rehearsal now feels like passing imagery. Attention no longer locks onto each possibility. It begins to widen. Widening attention reduces intensity. Intensity depends on focus. As focus softens, imagination loosens. The mind becomes less invested in rewriting the future, less interested in adjusting outcomes. It allows uncertainty to exist without fully solving it. Uncertainty, when not resisted, becomes less sharp. And as it becomes less sharp, the need to simulate decreases. Scenes shorten. They blur at the edges. They dissolve before forming completely. The nervous system continues settling, not because the mind forced it, but because the body no longer feels the need to stay alert. Imagination slows, not through effort, through quiet reduction. As imagined scenarios lose urgency, something subtle shifts in awareness. The mind still produces images, but they no longer feel as convincing. They move more slowly. They carry less emotional charge. Where earlier there was rehearsal, there is now observation. You may notice that the imagined conversations become shorter, less detailed, less rehearsed. The brain begins to recognize that prediction is no longer necessary. This recognition is not conscious. It happens gradually, beneath thought. The nervous system continues lowering its activation. Breathing deepens slightly. Muscles release without instruction. The body sends quiet signals of safety. And when the body signals safety, the mind reduces simulation. Forecasting depends on subtle alertness. When alertness fades, imagination softens. The scenarios that once felt important begin to feel distant. They no longer demand perfect outcomes. They no longer require correction. The mind stops editing. Instead of full scenes, there are brief impressions, a tone of voice without dialogue, a setting without movement, a feeling without story. These impressions drift rather than develop. Drifting requires less energy than constructing, and the brain prefers efficiency when threat is absent. Over time, the need to anticipate dissolves. Uncertainty remains, but it feels less sharp. Without sharpness, there is less impulse to rehearse. The imagined future loosens its grip. Attention widens again, not toward new scenarios, toward quiet. The room remains still. The body remains supported. The nervous system continues its slow descent into calm, and as calm deepens, imagination thins, not through force, through natural reduction. As the mind begins losing interest in constructing detailed outcomes, imagination becomes softer. What once felt structured now feels fluid. Scenes no longer unfold in full sequence. They appear briefly, then shift. There is less effort behind them. Earlier, the brain searched for control. Now it seems less concerned with perfecting the result. The imagined conversations shorten. The emotional tone becomes quieter. Without strong emotion, the body has no reason to remain alert. And without alertness, the mind reduces activity. Thought still arises, but it feels lighter, less convincing, less immersive. Instead of stepping inside the scenario, awareness begins watching it from a distance. Distance reduces intensity. Intensity depends on identification. When you no longer identify with the imagined outcome, it loses weight. The nervous system continues its gradual descent. Breathing settles into a slower rhythm. The body feels supported by stillness. Imagination begins breaking into fragments. A phrase without continuation. A gesture without context. A future moment that fades before forming. These fragments do not demand attention. They pass more easily. Forecasting requires energy. As energy lowers, prediction weakens. The mind no longer tries to anticipate every possibility. It allows uncertainty to exist without solving it. Uncertainty, when left untouched, becomes less threatening. And when it becomes less threatening, the need to simulate decreases further. What remains is gentle mental movement. Not rehearsal, not planning, just soft imagery. Imagery that dissolves before becoming detailed. The brain is no longer trying to prepare you. It is beginning to release you. Release is gradual, quiet, unannounced. And as release deepens, imagination thins once more. The imagined scenes no longer hold their structure. They begin to loosen at the edges. Where there was once dialogue, there is now only tone. Where there was once movement, there is now stillness. The mind no longer builds complete futures. It allows impressions to appear and fade. There is less attachment to outcome, less need to adjust what has not yet happened. Uncertainty remains, but it feels softer. It no longer presses for resolution. The nervous system continues settling beneath awareness. Breathing becomes steady. The body feels heavier against the surface supporting it. Imagination loses its urgency. It no longer tries to prepare you. It drifts instead. Images become faint. They carry less emotion. Without emotion, they dissolve more quickly. Thought appears briefly, then disappears before it gathers meaning. The mind is no longer invested in rehearsal. It is moving toward quiet observation. Observation itself begins to soften. Awareness widens, not toward new ideas, but toward stillness. The room remains unchanged. The body remains supported. There is nothing to respond to, nothing to solve. The imagined future grows less detailed, less vivid, less necessary. Attention begins to thin. As attention thins, imagery fades, and what once felt like mental activity now feels like passing shadow. The brain no longer searches for the safest outcome. It allows uncertainty to rest beside quiet, and quiet becomes slightly more noticeable than imagination. When imagined scenarios repeat at night, they often circle around one theme: control. Control over how you are perceived. Control over how events unfold. Control over how uncertainty resolves. The mind prefers rehearsed outcomes because rehearsed outcomes feel predictable. Predictability reduces perceived threat. The brain evolved to reduce social risk. Social belonging once determined survival. Even now, imagined conversations often involve evaluation. How you were seen. How you might be judged. How you might respond differently next time. These imagined adjustments are attempts at emotional repair. If something felt incomplete during the day, the mind tries to complete it internally. Completion feels stabilizing, but internal completion rarely feels final, because it is not shared. The nervous system does not fully register imagined resolution as real resolution, and so the scenario returns, sometimes in a slightly altered form, sometimes with more detail. The mind believes repetition will produce mastery, but repetition often reinforces activation instead. Each rehearsal strengthens the emotional pathway associated with it. Neural pathways respond to repetition. What repeats becomes easier to access. That is why certain imagined futures return night after night. They are not random. They are emotionally charged. Emotion marks them as important, and the brain prioritizes what feels important. At night, importance becomes louder. There is no competing input, no distractions, no tasks, only the internal landscape, and the internal landscape becomes amplified. This amplification does not mean the situation is urgent. It means the environment is quiet. The brain does not distinguish between silence and significance. When the world quiets, internal signals feel stronger, and so the mind continues rehearsing, not because tomorrow requires perfection, but because uncertainty still feels slightly unresolved. When the mind creates scenarios at night, it is often responding to unfinished emotional signals rather than unfinished events. An interaction may have ended hours ago, but the emotional tone may still feel open. The brain does not simply store events as facts. It stores them with emotional weight. If something felt uncertain, tense, or incomplete, that emotional residue remains active beneath awareness. During the day, external stimulation competes with that residue. There are sounds, tasks, conversations, decisions. At night, that competition disappears, and what remains begins to surface. The imagined scenarios are not random stories. They are attempts to process emotional tone. The brain replays possible outcomes not because it wants perfection, but because it wants stability. Stability reduces internal noise. When the mind constructs a future conversation, it is often trying to create a version that feels settled. A version where there is clarity. A version where there is acceptance. A version where there is safety. But imagined safety does not fully register in the nervous system. The body responds more strongly to lived experience than imagined resolution. So the brain repeats the exercise. It tries again, It adjusts the tone. It changes the response. It experiments with a different outcome. Each adjustment briefly reduces tension, but only briefly, because uncertainty still exists outside imagination, and uncertainty is uncomfortable for the human brain. The brain prefers prediction to ambiguity. Prediction feels like movement. Ambiguity feels like exposure. At night, exposure feels more noticeable. The quiet room creates contrast. In that contrast, internal signals grow louder. The imagined conversations are often less about the other person and more about your own sense of stability, how you are perceived, how you are valued, whether you were understood, whether you responded well enough. These questions do not require conscious intention. They arise automatically when the nervous system is still slightly alert. The mind believes that if it can mentally refine the future, it can reduce tomorrow's discomfort. But mental refinement does not calm the body in the same way real reassurance does. So the rehearsal continues, not aggressively, not dramatically, just quietly, repetitively. And because it is quiet, it feels more persistent. The absence of distraction makes the rehearsal feel larger than it is. It feels amplified, but amplification does not equal importance. It simply reflects stillness around it. And as the body gradually settles, amplification reduces, not through force, through natural quieting. Another reason the mind creates scenarios at night is that nighttime reduces external identity and increases internal reflection. During the day, you are interacting constantly, responding, performing roles, making decisions quickly. There is very little time to evaluate how those roles felt from the inside. At night, roles dissolve. There is no audience, no immediate feedback, no external demand, and in that absence the brain begins reviewing social experience. Social experience is deeply tied to survival systems in the brain. Belonging, approval, acceptance, these are not superficial desires. They are biologically rooted signals of safety. If something during the day slightly threatened that sense of belonging, even subtly, the brain flags it. Not loudly, but persistently. When the environment becomes quiet, those flagged experiences resurface. The mind then builds possible future versions where belonging feels secure. It imagines saying something more confident, more clear, more controlled. It imagines being understood differently. These imagined versions are not vanity. They are regulation attempts. The brain is trying to regulate emotional imbalance. If an interaction created even a small internal disturbance, the nervous system attempts to rebalance through mental simulation. Simulation is the brain's way of practicing equilibrium. But practice without physical completion does not always close the loop. So the mind returns to it, sometimes with subtle variations, sometimes with different emotional tones. The rehearsal may seem irrational, but biologically it is coherent. The brain is not interested in perfecting the conversation. It is interested in restoring internal safety. Night magnifies this process because internal signals become clearer. There is no competing noise, no social distraction, no cognitive overload. Only the internal review system remains active. And because it is active in silence, it feels stronger than it truly is. The mind can move through multiple possible futures in a short span of time. One version where everything goes well, another where tension increases, another where you remain silent. Each variation briefly shifts emotional tone. The nervous system samples each version, searching for the one that feels most stable. But stability and imagination rarely satisfies completely, because stability requires lived confirmation, and lived confirmation can only happen later. So the rehearsal continues not because something is wrong, but because the brain prefers completion to ambiguity, and ambiguity lingers most noticeably at night. There is also a cognitive reason these nighttime scenarios feel so compelling. When the body becomes still, the brain shifts into a mode that favors internal imagery. This shift is subtle but measurable. External sensory input decreases. Visual stimulation lowers. Movement reduces. When outward engagement drops, inward simulation becomes more accessible. The brain has networks designed specifically for this internal simulation. These networks help you imagine, predict, remember, and rehearse. During quiet states, they become more active. This does not mean something is wrong. It means the brain has entered a different mode of operation. In that mode, imagined events can feel unusually vivid. The boundaries between memory, prediction, and fantasy become softer. A remembered tone of voice can blend with a predicted response. A past event can merge with a future possibility. The mind moves fluidly between what happened and what might happen. Because these networks are closely tied to emotion, the body responds alongside the imagery. If the imagined scenario carries tension, the nervous system responds with subtle alertness. If it carries relief, the body softens. The brain is constantly updating emotional predictions. It wants to anticipate how tomorrow might feel. Prediction reduces surprise. Surprise requires rapid adaptation. The nervous system prefers preparation over sudden adjustment. But preparation has a cost. It maintains a low level of activation. And low activation is still activation. Sleep requires the nervous system to feel safe enough to release that activation. If the mind is still simulating outcomes, the system remains slightly engaged. Not dramatically, just enough to delay full descent into rest. Over time, though, even simulation loses energy. Imagined scenes become less detailed. The emotional tone begins to flatten. The brain recognizes that there is no immediate threat. The body signals stability. And when stability becomes consistent, the simulation networks begin reducing their activity. The imagined conversations shorten. The predicted outcomes blur. Forecasting becomes less structured, less urgent, more fragmented. What once felt like rehearsal begins to feel like distant imagery, and distant imagery holds less influence over the body. The nervous system senses this reduction. It lowers its guard slightly more. Breathing deepens. Muscles release further. The brain does not announce this shift. It happens gradually, quietly, without conscious decision. The mind begins to prefer stillness over prediction, and prediction slowly loosens its hold. As the brain begins reducing its simulation, the imagined conversations lose their emotional weight. They are no longer sharp, no longer vivid. They pass more like impressions than structured scenes. Where there was once detailed rehearsal, there is now a softer outline. The nervous system senses this change. It does not feel urgency in the same way. and without urgency, attention loosens. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer carry momentum. They do not build into full narratives. They arise briefly, then fade. The body continues settling beneath this shift. Breathing grows slightly slower. Muscles release areas of subtle holding. The mind becomes less interested in correcting the future, less invested in preparing responses. The imagined scenarios feel unfinished, but not demanding. Uncertainty remains, yet it feels less sharp, less pressing. The brain begins recognizing that no immediate action is required. There is no conversation happening now, no evaluation taking place, no response needed. The room remains still. The body remains supported. There is nothing to defend against, nothing to anticipate. And as this realization deepens, imagination weakens further. The rehearsal that once felt important begins to feel optional. Optional becomes unnecessary. Unnecessary becomes distant. The scenes shorten. Dialogue fragments into tone. Tone softens into suggestion. Suggestion fades before completion. Attention widens again, not toward new scenarios, but toward quiet. The nervous system continues lowering activation, not dramatically, just gradually, and gradual shifts are enough. The brain does not need certainty to rest. It only needs enough safety, enough stability, enough quiet. And quiet is becoming more noticeable now than prediction. The imagined conversations now feel softer. They no longer unfold with precision. They pass like faint echoes, a voice without clarity, a scene without movement. The mind does not hold on to them as tightly. It allows them to drift. Earlier there was effort beneath the rehearsal, a quiet attempt to refine, to adjust, to perfect. That effort is thinning now. Without effort, the scenarios lose structure. Without structure, they dissolve more easily. The body continues responding to this reduction. Breathing settles into a slower rhythm. The weight of the body feels more supported. There is less subtle tension in the muscles. The nervous system no longer treats imagination as preparation. It begins treating it as passing imagery. Passing imagery carries less urgency, less importance, less meaning. Uncertainty still exists, but it does not demand resolution. It simply rests in the background. Attention no longer narrows around possible outcomes. It widens. Widening reduces intensity. Intensity depends on focus. As focus softens, emotional charge fades. The imagined future becomes less detailed, less persuasive, less immersive. It feels distant, almost optional. Thought still arises, but it does not gather strength. It appears, then disappears before forming into sequence. The mind no longer builds complete narratives. It offers fragments, and fragments fade quickly. There is nothing to prepare for in this moment, nothing to respond to, nothing requiring correction. The room is quiet. The body is still, and quiet begins to feel easier than rehearsal. The nervous system senses no immediate need for prediction, and when prediction loses necessity, it loosens naturally. Imagination thins again, softly, without force, without decision, simply fading. Imagination continues to lose shape. Scenes no longer complete themselves. They appear as faint outlines, then soften. There is little effort behind them now. No adjustment. No rehearsal. No refinement. The mind does not hold them in place. It lets them pass. The body remains still. Breathing is steady, even unnoticed. There is no anticipation, no preparation. Uncertainty rests quietly. It does not feel sharp. It does not demand response. Attention no longer narrows around possibility. It widens, becomes softer, more diffuse. Thought appears briefly, then dissolves before meaning gathers. Emotion is thin, almost neutral. The imagined future feels distant, unnecessary. It does not compete with quiet. Quiet feels more present now, more stable than prediction. Nothing needs to be corrected. Nothing needs to be completed. Nothing requires preparation. Awareness remains light, unstructured, uninvolved. Imagination fades further, without resistance, without effort, simply thinning. Imagination continues, but it no longer feels purposeful. Scenes do not complete themselves. They appear as faint impressions, then soften before becoming clear. The mind is no longer trying to prepare you. It is simply releasing movement. Thoughts arrive without weight. They do not demand correction. They do not require improvement. They drift in and out of awareness. The body remains still. Breathing stays steady. There is no signal of urgency. Without urgency, there is no need to rehearse. The imagined conversations lose their tone. Words blur. Responses fade before forming. Attention begins to settle deeper into the body, not through effort, through gradual quieting. The nervous system no longer holds subtle tension. Shoulders soften. Jaw relaxes. Breath deepens slightly. Imagination thins further. Where there was once dialogue, there is now only faint imagery. Where there was once imagery, there is now suggestion. Suggestion fades more easily than detail. Awareness becomes less engaged, less curious, less invested. The future is no longer being constructed. It is left open, open without pressure, open without urgency. The mind begins to prefer stillness over simulation, and stillness begins to feel easier than prediction. Thought slows. Spacing increases. Moments stretch gently. There is no effort to continue, no effort to stop. Imagination fades in small increments. Quiet becomes slightly more present. The mind no longer builds complete scenes. It allows fragments to pass quietly. An unfinished sentence, a faint image, a tone without context. They appear briefly, then fade. There is no need to follow them, no need to improve them. Imagination has slowed. It no longer feels immersive. It feels distant. The body remains supported. Breathing continues without effort. There is no subtle preparation for response, no anticipation. Without anticipation, the nervous system rests more fully. Thought grows softer, less defined, less connected. Moments do not form into sequence. They drift separately. Awareness does not hold them together. It lets them move. The imagined future is no longer vivid. It carries little detail, little emotion, little urgency. Uncertainty remains, but it is quiet. It does not demand resolution. It simply exists, and without resistance, it becomes lighter. Attention begins to loosen its focus. It does not settle on any image for long. Nothing calls it back. Nothing requires continuation. The mind feels less interested in simulation, more willing to release it. Thought appears as suggestion, then dissolves. The room remains unchanged. The body remains still. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to revise. Imagination softens further, and quiet becomes easier to remain with. Imagination no longer forms complete moments. It offers faint outlines, then releases them. There is little structure now, little sequence, little intention. Thought moves slowly. It does not build. It does not rehearse. It appears as a soft impression, then fades. The body remains heavy against stillness. Breathing continues evenly. There is no subtle readiness, no preparation. Without preparation, there is no urgency. Without urgency, there is no need to simulate. Awareness widens slightly. It does not follow imagery. It does not hold memory. It allows everything to pass. Fragments lose detail. Edges blur. Emotion thins. Nothing insists on continuation. Nothing asks to be completed. The imagined future feels distant, unnecessary. It no longer competes with quiet. Quiet feels closer now, more stable, more present than thought. Spacing increases. Moments stretch gently. There is less to notice, less to revise, less to anticipate. Imagination softens into background movement, then into near stillness. The mind is no longer forecasting. It is loosening, releasing without effort, drifting without direction, and quiet remains. Imagination has nearly stopped forming scenes. Only faint impressions remain. They do not gather. They do not continue. Thought appears briefly, then disappears. There is no need to follow it, no need to shape it. The body feels heavier now. Breathing is steady, even, unnoticed. There is no anticipation, no rehearsal, no revision. The imagined future feels distant, unimportant, unformed. Attention no longer attaches to it. It rests wider, softer, more diffuse. Fragments arise without detail. They dissolve before meaning forms. Emotion has thinned. Urgency has faded. Nothing asks for completion. Nothing remains to be corrected. The mind no longer searches for safer outcomes. It allows uncertainty to rest quietly, and uncertainty, left untouched, grows lighter. Quiet feels easier than thought. Stillness feels more natural than prediction. Awareness loosens further. It does not hold images. It does not build them. It remains light, unfocused, uninvolved, and imagination continues to fade. Imagination is no longer active. Only traces remain. A suggestion, then nothing. Thought does not develop. It appears faintly, then fades. There is no effort to continue it, no effort to stop it. The body rests fully. Breathing is slow, steady, unnoticed. There is no anticipation now, no rehearsal, no adjustment. The imagined future has loosened. It no longer forms clearly. Uncertainty feels quiet, soft, neutral. Attention does not move toward it. It remains still, wider, more diffuse, Fragments arise without shape. They dissolve before becoming meaning. Emotion is minimal, almost absent. Nothing asks for resolution. Nothing seeks completion. The mind is no longer predicting. It is no longer preparing. It is simply resting. Awareness thins. Edges blur. Spacing widens. Quiet becomes more stable than thought, more constant, more natural, and imagination fades into the background. There is almost no movement now, no forming of scenes, no rehearsal, no revision. Thought appears faintly, then disappears. It does not gather detail. It does not continue. The body remains still. Breathing moves softly, unnoticed. There is no anticipation, no preparation, no adjustment. Uncertainty rests quietly. It does not demand response. Attention does not follow it. Awareness feels light, diffuse, unfocused. Nothing insists on being completed. Nothing remains urgent. Fragments arise without shape. They dissolve before meaning forms. Emotion is thin, almost absent. The imagined future no longer forms. It is loosened completely. Quiet remains more noticeable than thought. Stillness feels steady, more constant than imagination. Awareness does not hold images. It allows them to fade. There is no effort, no monitoring, no control, only soft presence. And even that begins to thin. Nothing is forming now. No future scenes, no imagined dialogue. Thought appears briefly, then fades. There is no need to follow it, no need to respond. The body remains still. Breathing is slow, even, unnoticed. There is no anticipation, no rehearsal, no adjustment. Uncertainty rests quietly. It no longer feels sharp. Attention does not move toward it. Awareness feels light, open, unstructured. Fragments dissolve before meaning. Emotion is quiet, nearly gone. The mind is not predicting, not preparing, not revising. Imagination has thinned, almost completely. Quiet remains, stable, steady, uncomplicated. There is nothing to solve, nothing to construct, nothing to correct, only stillness. And even that feels softer now. Nothing gathers, no scene forms, no words assemble. Thought appears faintly, then disappears. There is no need to notice, no need to adjust. The body rests, heavy, supported. Breathing continues, slow, unnoticed. There is no anticipation, no preparation, no rehearsal. Uncertainty is quiet, soft, neutral. Awareness does not move. It remains light, diffuse, unfocused. Fragments do not complete. They fade before shape. Emotion is distant, barely present. Imagination has loosened, almost entirely. Nothing remains urgent. Nothing remains unfinished. Quiet feels closer than thought. Stillness feels natural. The mind is no longer simulating, no longer predicting, no longer revising, only resting. And even that feels effortless now. There is no forming now, no imagined future, no rehearsal. Thought appears lightly, then fades. It does not gather. It does not continue. The body remains still. Breathing moves gently, unnoticed. No anticipation, no adjustment, no preparation. Uncertainty rests quietly, without weight, without edge. Awareness feels thin, light, unstructured. Nothing asks for completion. Nothing asks for correction. Fragments dissolve before meaning. Emotion is distant, almost gone. Imagination has nearly ended. Quiet feels steady, more present than thought. There is nothing to solve, nothing to revise, nothing to construct. Only stillness, soft, stable, open, and even that begins to thin. Nothing forms, no future, no rehearsal. Thought flickers, then fades. No need to follow, no need to adjust. The body rests. Breathing continues, soft, even, unnoticed. No anticipation, no response. Uncertainty is quiet, barely present. Awareness feels thin, open, unfocused. Fragments dissolve immediately. Emotion is faint, almost absent. Imagination has stopped. Quiet remains, steady, unmoving. Nothing to complete, nothing to prepare. Only stillness, light, effortless, and thinning. There is no movement, no forming, no imagining. Thought does not gather. It fades before shape. The body is still. Breathing is soft, unnoticed. No anticipation, no preparation. Uncertainty rests. Quiet, neutral. Awareness remains light, diffuse, uninvolved. Nothing continues. Nothing begins. Emotion is distant, barely there. Imagination has ended. Stillness remains, steady, open, unbroken. Nothing to solve, nothing to revise, only quiet, soft, stable, and thinning further. Nothing forms now. No future, no past, no rehearsal. Thought does not gather. It fades immediately. The body rests. Breathing moves gently, unnoticed. No anticipation, no response. Uncertainty is quiet, without weight. Awareness is thin, open, unfocused. Nothing begins. Nothing continues. Emotion is absent. Imagination has fully stopped. Stillness remains, steady, unchanging. Nothing to solve, nothing to prepare, only quiet, soft, complete. There is no return now, no forming of thought, no imagining, no rehearsal. Nothing gathers, nothing continues. The body rests completely. Breathing continues, unnoticed. No anticipation, no preparation, no response. Uncertainty has no edge. Awareness is faint, unstructured, uninvolved. Nothing remains unfinished. Nothing requires resolution. Imagination is absent. Stillness remains, soft, steady, unbroken. Nothing to solve, nothing to revise, nothing to prepare. Only quiet, open, unchanging, complete.